You're listening to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of the best in contemporary a cappella. I'm Evan.
And I'm Kayla, and on today's episode we have Shams Ahmed. He's a former music director for the Nor'easters, and he also works at the vocal company. And during the summer, he's a director at A Cappella Academy.
He's also a judge for the ICCAs, ICHSAs, CASA, and is a teacher at the Betsy festivals. We're really lucky to have him on the show. There's a really good episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. We're here with the wonderful Shams Ahmed, and we're so happy to have him here. We're going to jump right in. So, Shams, the first topic I wanted to start on is arranging, because that's your forte. And I just wanted to ask, first, when you're working with specific clients, what do you take into account when you're arranging something specifically for them?
Well, I definitely start off by examining the voices that are in the group because that's kind of like I would say probably one of the most important things when doing like custom work for a group. You want to understand like what the personality types are, but also like what the voice can do in the group, like what each group member is capable of, and also what they like. I think it's really important to arrange music for groups that they're going to enjoy singing. Because sometimes I feel like groups will ask for a specific song, or maybe like the music director of a group will ask for a specific song, but then like the rest of the group just doesn't really like the song, and so they're not really into it. So I would say knowing the people and the voices quite well to begin, and then getting into the more technical stuff.
Cool. So, in regards to collaboration, obviously a lot of arrangers work solo, and you do a lot of work yourself solo. But also you've done a lot of collaboration as well at Acapella Academy, etc. And groups like Pentatonics, whatever. Everybody's kind of getting into that collaborative spirit a little bit more than I feel like it has been in the past. So, when you work that way, what are the benefits of that, and what do you find are the benefits of just working solo?
When I first started arranging, I was really actually non-collaborative. I didn't really know how to work with somebody else on arranging because it was a very personal thing to me. And then I think over the course of, the years that I was working on arranging, there I would just find myself in more situations where I needed to collaborate with someone else. Um, most recently at Acapella Academy, where we have several directors who have like a lot of stake in what the groups are doing. And we have camp founders as well who, want to make sure that they have a stake in what's going on. So we collaborate on arrangements in that way. And then most recently, I collaborated with the current music director of the Nor'easters on their ICCA set for this year. And that was really interesting because it was the first time I sat down in a room with like another person for many hours and kind of developed ideas with that person. The collaboration that I did before when it came to like Acapella Academy was a little bit more like conceptual. It was more like, oh, these are our ideas and let's put them together to create an arrangement. And then one person would usually put pen to paper and make the arrangement itself happen, but the ideas were more collaborative. In my most recent experience with Elliot, we really sat down together and like did everything kind of step by step the way that I would normally by myself. And I would say the advantage of doing it that way, where you're both sitting together, is just there's this constant vetting process that sometimes you don't get when you're working on arrangement by yourself, which is really cool because you don't really allow any bad ideas to happen because you're constantly checking yourself and the other person is checking you and you're checking the other person. So I would say that's a really cool thing. Obviously it's a double-edged sword though, because sometimes the beauty of just arranging by yourself is allowing your mind to wander and kind of get your ideas to develop as much as they possibly can. Sometimes it's like not the best idea, but I think it's a good exercise to be able to do both.
And just kind of along these lines, I'm just wondering, like, when you do arrange, do you think conceptually first, or do you go straight pen to paper? Do you work in like recordings first, or do you just go straight to the notes and plug and play?
So, in terms of my arranging process, I would say that I've moved from straight to notation now to pretty much exclusively recording. Um, I've kind of developed like my ear in terms of what I like to do as an arranger. So all the kind of motifs that I like to go to, um, phrasing for me just comes a lot easier when I'm able to sing it. And that's kind of my style as an arranger too. I like to make sure that all of the lines are very singable. Um, so in my experience, I think it's just easier for me to record them myself. And what I tend to see in terms of the final product in my arrangements is that I get a lot more kind of like horizontal arranging as opposed to like very kind of stacked chords. It's more about making sure each line is really singable. And that's kind of the big benefit that I've found from recording my arrangements first. It allows my mind to wander. It allows me to like get a lot of cool phrases down without being like limited by my notation skills or lack thereof. So I can notate, but I don't like to as much because I feel almost limited by that. And when it comes to recording my arrangements, I'm able to like build really interesting phrases that to me are appealing. And it kind of, for me, lends to better voice leading. If I really like the way a certain line goes, then I will harmonize it as opposed to really make sure the chord is intact first. So I kind of build motifs and phrases first and then I harmonize as opposed to laying out the chords first. Of course, as like a person who arranges a lot of music, I have to think about, are these lines fitting within the chord structure? And that's just kind of become second nature to me. It's like, okay, well, I know what the chords are. So I just need to make sure this line or this phrase fits within that.
So when you first began arranging, where were you looking for inspiration? And now, as a seasoned arranger, where are you finding that inspiration coming from?
So when I first began arranging, I sought like inspiration from other a cappella groups. That was like pretty much exactly what it was because I was so new to a cappella singing specifically. I would look at, collegiate groups, and this was when I was in high school. So I would look at collegiate groups who were hot at the time, like some pro group. There weren't that many pro groups really like there are now, but I would look at collegiate groups, pro groups, Chanticleer, like different like choral, but like small group choral groups. Um, and when I was in high school, I was in an all male a cappella group, and I started kind of um, arranging a little bit for them, but it was mostly transcriptive stuff. Like I would find a cappella arrangements that other groups did, and I would like try and transcribe it onto sheet music and then teach it to my group. So that's kind of how I exercised that. Um, and as I've kind of progressed in my arranging life, I guess I've transitioned more from being inspired by other a cappella groups to being inspired by um, specific musicians. And I kind of look more to them for the inspiration because I think a cappella as a genre is still kind of like fledgling in a way, and like there are only so many things that people have really done so far. And so it's cool to look beyond a cappella to try and figure out like what new interesting thing can be brought back from like the outside world and then back into the a cappella world and kind of repurposed for our specific genre or instrumentation, if you will. So I do like looking at other a cappella groups nowadays. Of course, I listen to other a cappella groups for sure, but I generally go outside of a cappella to seek that inspiration. A lot of my inspiration comes from different composers. I love different choral composers. I listen to a lot of like Palestrina. Whitaker is kind of like an obvious answer for everyone these days, but um, I listen to a lot of bands also because I find that the arranging in certain bands is very cool. I've always been inspired by the arrangements of Linkin Park, actually, which is like kind of random, but I find their textures really interesting and just like I just love them. Um, and which I think is kind of a random answer, but I also am really inspired by the composer A.R. Rahman, who's done a lot of just like notable work in Bollywood and also Hollywood these days. And yeah, so I would say my development as an arranger in terms of seeking inspiration has gone from looking at other a cappella groups and what they were doing to now looking at musicians outside of a cappella to see what they're doing using all of the different instruments and voices that they have access to, and then kind of like figuring out how that translates into my world.
So, kind of along these lines, we know that you've had experience in musical theater directing shows like Rent and Spring Awakening. So, I'm just wondering if maybe do you get any inspiration from musical theater for a cappella and how the two are sort of connected?
Yeah, I think a cappella and musical theater share a number of similarities and also are dissimilar in a lot of ways. In terms of their similarities, I think you have a similar audience a lot of the time. You do have people who are participating in both musical theater and a cappella groups, over the course of their lives. You have listeners of that both types of music. And in terms of purely musical aspects, I think the similarities for me that are most interesting about I would say if you call a cappella my main thing and then like musical theater my side thing, then then I would say I use a lot of my a cappella knowledge or kind of experience to help improve musical theater. And I think usually that comes in the form of just like proper tuning of like chords and background vocals that happen in musical theater sometimes tend to be a little bit more simple, of course, but I think it's just as important to sing them like in tune, just like we do in a cappella. So I think that sometimes I bring a little bit of my a cappella directorial experience into the music directing of, say, kind of to things with more complex scores, like Spring Awakening, for example, was a great musical for me to work on because I really like dense chords, and Duncan Sheik kind of does an amazing job with that in his musical. So it really just it spoke to me in term, musically. So I was into it. And also the way that the voice kind of operates in that musical is very similar to the way it operates in an a cappella group. So I had a lot of fun with that musical in particular. Um, and just in terms of like the general tone of the musical, like I like the kind of dissonant, dark, um, aesthetic, if you will, and Spring Awakening definitely had that. And then when I music directed Rent, I had a lot of fun because there was a lot of like belting, and I'm also very much into like those power moments, and Rent has like a ton of those. So I would say I was able to get a lot of satisfaction out of the musical theater shows and the kind of music directing musical theater productions that I would normally with like an a cappella group, just given the similarities in the music type. But in terms of just bringing the experience from a cappella into the experience of directing in musical theater, I feel like there are also similarities there too, and one can really learn a lot from the other. Um, on the flip side of things, I think that a cappella groups could borrow from musical theater a little bit more. I think sometimes a cappella groups say like, "Oh, we don't do musical theater," but like maybe a cappella groups could do a little more musical theater, and then maybe they'd have more authentic feeling performances. And I do think that. I think that sometimes a cappella groups, especially nowadays, a cappella groups want to look like so cool that it's like almost like too cool, and you're like, but wait, like this is still a performance that you want to make someone feel a certain way. And I think with that acting, or with I mean really effective acting, that you see sometimes in musical theater, I think it could really benefit a cappella, especially these days where the way things are going right now is, everyone wants to be like this like sexy a cappella group that like wears all black, right? They just like want to be like so cool and like moody, which I totally get the appeal of, but I don't know, it's just an interesting thing to think about when it comes to like trends in a cappella that we've been seeing over the past, like 10 years.
Yeah, well, that leads us really well into talking about teaching. When you talk about teaching, there's obviously the technical side, and then there's this kind of emotive, enigmatic side.
Yeah.
So when you were directing Maristas, or now when you'll come into masterclass group, what are kind of the principles that you try to bring to that, and like how do you split time between those two kind of worlds of trying to direct a group?
Yeah. That's a great question. So the way I kind of decide how I'm going to allocate rehearsal time, for example, to more technical aspects of singing, and then the more kind of community building and like story and emotional kind of appeal of singing, it's a balance, and it's tough sometimes to strike a good balance, especially when you're pressed for time and you're like, you know, trying to get your whole set together for your big showcase or a competition or whatever it is. It is really tough. I like to take the approach of, let's learn the music and get all the technical stuff just like down pat, so that we can really focus on what I believe is the more important part, is the emotional appeal or the emotional impact that you can give with a performance. So generally, in, if I'm running a group, the my expectation is that we're not going to spend a lot of rehearsal time together, like plunking out parts on the piano. I generally like to rehearse in rooms that don't actually have a piano, so we have to really rely on ourselves to like get it right. um and so I tend to veer more towards like, okay, let's not use the time that we've all set up, or that we've all kind of scheduled to say like all 16 or however many of us are going to be here at this time together. Let's not use that time to go over the baritone line 10 times, because what is that doing for everyone else in the group? In my opinion, nothing much. I mean, there's some value there, but largely it's not that important for everyone to hear me teaching everyone else's parts. um Obviously there are moments where it's a good teaching opportunity to kind of instruct a group, but that's more in terms of, I think, phrasing and dynamics. But in terms of part learning, I tend to tell my groups to just learn the parts at home, and I give them every possible resource to do so, like demos, part tapes, MIDI files, obviously sheet music. And then I also help, if I'm directing that group, I will help you if you just like send me a text message and say, can you sing my part into your phone, and just like, for this 5 measures, I will do that. So I'm very much of that mentality where when we come together, let's do things that benefit everyone, so that we can really feel productive. I think a lot of keeping a group motivated, um a lot of that comes from individual group members feeling like their time at rehearsal is well spent. And I think it's really, really important to make sure that, not everyone, yes, not everyone is going to have like 100% efficiency, and we're not going to be using 100% of people 100% of the time, but it is important to kind of think about your rehearsals in that way. So I like to do that. Um, and that way, being really efficient and only focusing on the needs of the whole, um, allows me to really tap into the emotional impact of a song. So I like to spend a lot of time sitting down all together and really, analyzing the lyrics. Like, we'll sit down and we'll have somebody recite the lyrics. Sometimes it's the soloist, sometimes it's like a round robin popcorn situation, but we go through all the lyrics and we say, what are the important lyrics to us? Like, what do we think relay the overall message of the song? And we emphasize those lyrics. And this also goes back to arranging. It's like, when I arrange, I look at the lyrics and I say, which lyrics are the most important lyrics for me in this song? When I think of a song in its entirety, what is the macro concept here? Like, we can listen to a song like Diamonds by Rihanna, and to me, that, I mean, of course that was like a pop song, it was a radio hit, everybody knew the song. And when I kind of listened to the song, the macro concept for me was more that this was like a sad song. It was kind of like this longing, maybe even like this mourning of like a death of someone, and that was kind of my idea about what the song was like. And so when I looked at all the lyrics, I said, what are like the most important lyrics in this? And I kind of went through line by line and I circled those lyrics. And then in my arrangement, I said, okay, I want these lyrics to shine. And sometimes I took out other lyrics that didn't really make sense for like the message that I wanted to portray. And I think that's okay from an arranger standpoint. You can kind of do what you want and what you feel like you need to do. But that also extends into the rehearsal process too. It's like, what parts or what moments of the song are really important, and how do you get the most emotional impact out of them? So one way is definitely by sitting down and kind of parsing through all of the lyrics and really understanding what's important to you and what's important to everyone in the group collectively. Another kind of great thing that I found in my experience, a cool exercise is to have everyone pair up and sing the song, the whole song, like gazing into each other's eyes the whole time and really never kind of averting that gaze. It's actually a super powerful exercise, especially when you're singing like a ballad. Um, so I like to spend, I would say, like 70% of rehearsal time trying to do more activities and exercises like that so that we can really connect to the music. Because if there's, if you try like 15 different exercises, you can hope that one of them is going to stay with each singer in your group by the time that performance comes along, right? So by the time the performance comes along, you're thinking as a director, okay, hopefully exercise 1 through 15, one of those is in there somewhere and you can channel that. And that's kind of, that's kind of how I approach, that's how I try to approach a lot of different things. And when it comes to teaching music, it's like give everyone several opportunities to understand what you're talking about, as opposed to just your one singular, approach, and hope that you get 100%. Even if you have to do a lot of extra work to kind of make sure that you're catering to different styles of learning or different kind of viewpoints. To me, it's important for the teacher to do like that extra legwork so that they can try and reach everyone. So that's kind of that. I mean, that's just kind of how I like to teach lots of different things, but specifically in a cappella singing, it's by introducing different images or doing different exercises that can hopefully resonate.
And I think just kind of along these lines of teaching, in a world where a cappella is highly competitive and there's a lot of festivals and competitions constantly happening, how do you as a teacher sort of instill certain values in groups when you're workshopping them or masterclassing them?
That's a great question. It's really important to instill more long-term strategies in groups. A lot of groups will try and bring, someone in as a clinician just for a quick fix, or what they initially think is going to be a quick fix so that we can get us ready for like quarterfinals or get us ready for a festival or something. But I think what's way more valuable is kind of that impact in the long run. And sometimes when I go to rehearsal, yes, we'll spend like the first hour just working on, notes and cleaning up stuff. But I like to spend like the latter half of any time that I spend with groups basically talking through, what is the reason for all of this effort? Like, why are they putting in all this effort? Why is it important to them that they like win a competition? And a lot of times it's because groups really want validation and they want other people to see that they worked really hard. And I think that when you can validate a group without, when you can still validate a group that doesn't win the competition, that's really when you've done the best job. It's letting a group know that you've already done so much. And it kind of sounds cliche, but I do think this is true. It's like if you put in all this effort and all this work to make music with a bunch of other people, you've already done like the best thing. You've already done the best part of what you're doing. And yes, it is nice to receive like a trophy or a certificate saying that like 5 other people thought that you were the best out of this like random collection of other groups that like also did these things. But I think you're missing the point if that's the only thing that you seek validation from. And so I like to remind groups of that after all of this like nitty gritty notes and choreography, and my hand was here and your hand was here. Like, it's really important to me to remind groups that all of this work, this entire journey that they've gone on together is the best part of it. And even if like the results of whatever they're doing, whether it's a competition or it's like, like compilation selections or whatever it is, if they're quote unsuccessful by whatever standards that they've kind of like built for themselves or that have built by that have been built by the acapella community, if they fail at that, they should still know that just by coming together and putting in like 20 to 40 hours a week sometimes building a set. Like they've created a piece of art, and that art will be forever. As long as they remember it, it will be forever. And that to me is like truly the best part of making music with anyone in general, whether it's a cappella or sitting around a piano. Um, and so to me, it's really important to give that advice to groups, is just to kind of help them remember that after this competition, like you will still be here and you will still be a group and you will come together and create more music, and maybe you will get that external validation, but just don't think of that external validation as being everything.
I think that's a great answer because I think it's really an awakening for a lot of groups. I know for us, when we realized, hey, we're coming to rehearsal, 2 to 3 times a week, and we're putting all this effort in this thing, and like,
Well, and just on that really quick, it's like if you only focus on like what the judges are thinking about your set, that can be such a random and like incalculable amount of just like combinations of what people will think. And so why stress yourself out about that when you can be more concerned about just performing a set that you really care about, or music that you really care about, and with people that you really care about? Like that is the stuff that you can control. And so it's just always better to focus on improving those aspects, improving the levels that you actually have control over, as opposed to like random subjective, like opinions and things like that. Of course, there are certain baseline things that groups want to do. They want to sing in tune, they want to have like good soloists, but um it's really important to also just love what you're doing, because no one in their right mind like would spend that much time putting a set together if they didn't love it. And sometimes you have to remind yourself that you love it, and I think that's the key. And it sometimes takes like an external person to come in and just be like, oh, by the way, guys, you love what you do.
absolutely. And I think we're unfortunately reaching the end of this interview today, but we just wanted to ask you before you left. You've obviously been a big part of the acapella community for a few years now. So what in the acapella scene is really exciting you nowadays, and what is something that you hope will change or evolve or phase out from the scene as somebody who's kind of observing the way that you are?
I think that there are so many exciting parts about the acapella community. It's hard to pick one thing, but something I'm really excited by and that I see more of every day and every month and every year is this is the idea that acapella groups can start like at a really young age. Cause now I'm seeing like this just amazing development of like incredibly talented groups starting in like middle school, and like high school has just evolved so much in the past, I don't know, maybe like 5 years. Just I feel like the high school scene has really blown up, and it's amazing to see it. I get to see it every year at Acapella Academy because I get 13 to 18-year olds. So it's all high school students. And just seeing how much talent there is out there. I mean, these kids are insanely good. And I'm so happy that, I, in my small way, get to work at Acapella Academy and kind of shape a little bit these singers, and then they go back to their hometowns wherever they live, and they start their own acapella groups, and their acapella groups tend to be really good because they have like these great resources helping them. And it's kind of the cyclical thing, and then they go into college, and then they end up singing in acapella groups that like we were in, and it's really cool. And or they make their own acapella groups. And so I just think overall, starting this acapella thing at a really high level at a young age is amazing. And it's going to be the reason why this community gets stronger and becomes more enriched over the next, however many years. It's because we're starting them young and showing them quality at a young age. And I think that's really, really awesome. So that's definitely one thing I'm very excited by in the acapella community, and I hope it continues forever. Um, Instead of thinking about what I want to phase out of the acapella community, I would like to challenge, especially collegiate groups, to stay true to their musical identity and really only make choices that go with that kind of speak to their unique musical identity. And so that to me is really important.
So that about wraps it up. Thank you, Shams, for chatting with us today.
And we hope you'll join us next week for a new episode of Head Voice.
Choose your last word.